Hey, how's it going? In this video, I'll go over my experience with installing my TSS front subframe. I also upgraded my low control arms and bushings, my steering rack bushings, and transmission mounts. If you're considering this upgrade, I strongly suggest doing it while the engine is removed. But in this video, I'm going to install it on jack stands and with the engine in the car. Okay, let's get into it. Once the car is in the air, I supported the front of the engine with a trans bridge on top and a hydraulic jack with a rubber puck supporting the rear of the engine via the transmission. You can use a stationary jack stand if you want. If you are going to do this with the engine in, make sure you have enough tension on top and support on the bottom where the engine will not drop down when the subframe is unbolted. And now that the engine is supported, the removal of the subframe is pretty straightforward. Now the first thing you do is set your steering wheel straight ahead and mark your steering shaft joint and the power steering rack input shaft. This will allow it to make it a lot easier to reassemble without having your steering wheel not centered. Then you disconnect the tie rod ends from both of your steering knuckles. Remove the lower control arms and the sway bar. So for the next step, you want a drip pan and some rags because you have to disconnect the power steering lines from the rack. Now they are tucked in pretty tight, but with a little bit of patience and some wrenches, you can get to it from the bottom of the vehicle. Next, remove the two nuts holding the engine to the subframe. And once those are removed, there should only be 4 bolts holding the subframe to the chassis. So to do that, you put a hydraulic jack on the center of the subframe and slowly remove the bolts while monitoring if the engine shifts or moves at all. If the engine shifts or moves, increase the tension that you have on your trans bridge or your hydraulic jack. And then once the nuts are out, you should be able to lower the subframe with the hydraulic jack and remove from the vehicle. Now that it's out, it's time to check the weight difference. The original subframe comes in about 24.2 pounds and the new one is 17.6 pounds. So that's a 6.6 pound or 27% weight reduction from stock. Now remember, just like the rear subframe, this mod isn't about weight reduction only. It's also about adding rigidity to the chassis. Alright, moving on. Before installing the new piece, I suggest opening up the bolt holes for the control arms. You're going to do this with a Dremel and a little sanding wheel. You have to do this because the powder coat makes the holes a bit too small for the bolts to pass through. Then after you open up those holes, you're going to transfer your steering rack from the old subframe to the new subframe. Also, the new subframe comes with new hardware to bolt the frame to the chassis. You have to use the new hardware. I tested the old ones to see if they fit, and it barely grabs enough thread for it to get torqued properly. So save yourself the time, and while the subframe is out, put the new bolts in. The old bolts are welded together via a plate, and a Phillips screw holds the bolts to the chassis. These can be removed without taking out any other components. You just need a Phillips head. Now once the new bolts are placed and fit into the frame, you can torque everything down and reconnect everything you removed. Now the important thing is to remember when you're putting in your low control arms and everything, make sure that you compress the suspension so that it is at right height, and then you torque your low control arm bolts. Now once the new frame is in, the power steering lines are a lot easier to reinstall because the tube frame design of the new subframe, it frees up a lot of space, so it shouldn't be as much of a hassle to put the power steering lines back into place. Aside from securing the engine so it doesn't shift in the beginning, in my opinion, the front subframe is a lot simpler to remove and install versus the rear subframe. And after I got everything bolted up, I took it out for the drive. And you can definitely hear and feel the increase in NVH, but I was expecting that. This is a lockdown subframe. I changed out my bushings so they're a little bit stiffer, so it wasn't expected. In my opinion, it's totally worth it. Like I said in my previous video, this kit is an awesome upgrade if you're looking to improve your car's rigidity and you have a very rusty donut subframe like I did. So that's it for this one. I'm working on setting up my suspension, and I'll share some notes on my swap experience as well. So stay tuned, and thanks for watching.